Conviction Beyond Logic by Wisdom Matrix 1111. Have you ever stopped for a moment and contemplated whether you should follow that strong inner feeling guiding you? Whether you should trust what you sense is true about a decision you're about to make, a direction you're considering taking, or that subtle feeling that something is off, even when everything looks fine on the surface? We all experience those subtle inner signals, but most people brush them aside. Yet those signals are often the earliest whispers of something deeper. There are moments in life when something inside you knows, long before the evidence appears. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's more like a steady pulse beneath the noise of your doubts, an inner conviction that says, "This is the way." And when you pause long enough to really feel it, you realize that this conviction is not random, it's not wishful thinking. It's a form of inner truth, a compass pointing to the next right step, even when the outer world doesn't match it yet. This contemplation isn't about blind belief, it's about learning to recognize the difference between impulse and inner knowing, between anxiety and alignment, between what your fears predict and what your deeper intelligence understands. And here's the important part. Conviction isn't always beyond logic, but many of the greatest breakthroughs in history happened when conviction overrode logic. When people moved anyway, even when their flaws, insecurities, limitations, or circumstances said not possible. Athletes who were told they'd never return but did. Entrepreneurs who were told their ideas would fail but built empires. Healers who were given impossible odds but walked out with miracles. In all these stories, one thing rises above everything else. Inner conviction, sometimes aligned with logic, other times defying it, but always rooted in a deeper truth that refuses to be ignored. When you learn to trust that subtle inner pulse, you're no longer reacting to life. You're partnering with it. You're letting an invisible force, intuition, clarity, alignment, whatever you call it, show you a path your rational mind couldn't see yet. And that's where the real journey begins. Now you might be wondering, what exactly is this inner pulse you feel? Is it intuition? Is it an assumption? Or is it conviction? Before anything powerful ever happens in your outer world, it first begins inside you. But the inner world has layers, and that's why we need to understand the difference between intuition, assumption, and inner conviction. These three words may sound similar, but they play very different roles. And together they build the foundation that transforms your life. Intuition is the whisper. It's the first spark. It's that sudden pull towards something that feels right before you have any evidence to justify it. Intuition doesn't shout, it nudges, it guides. It's your inner compass saying, listen to this, try that. Pay attention here. You don't force intuition. It arrives naturally, lightly, quietly. Assumption, on the other hand, is intentional. Assumption is when you choose the inner direction you want to embody. You occupy the state of the wish fulfilled before anything has manifested. You start acting from the end. You speak differently. You think differently. You feel differently. Neville Goddard said, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, because assumption is a choice, a deliberate act of imagination that trains your mind and body to live in a new internal reality. And then comes inner conviction, the final stage. Inner conviction is not forced. It is the natural result of repeated assumption. At first, you imagine the new version of yourself. Then you assume it, and if you persist long enough, the assumption becomes a knowing, a grounded certainty, a calm inner truth that no longer wavers just because the outer world says otherwise. This is the point where you stop checking for results. You stop waiting. You stop doubting. You simply know. And when you reach this stage, the outer reality must, sooner or later, conform to your inner state. Think of it like this. Intuition lights the match, assumption fuels the flame, and conviction becomes the steady fire that reshapes the world around you. Now let's make this real. Let's see how intuition, assumption, and conviction look in actual life situations, in healing, in money, in relationships, and in personal success. Imagine someone facing a health challenge. The diagnosis is discouraging, the logic is against them, but suddenly something inside whispers, "This isn't the end. There's another way." That's intuition. Then they begin to assume wholeness, imagining the body regenerating, seeing themselves strong, healthy, and energetic. They rehearse this identity every day. They speak from it. They visualize from it. Over time, something shifts. The assumption becomes conviction. They no longer feel like someone fighting for healing. They feel like someone who is already healing. They begin acting like a well person. Their body responds, their energy rises, and little by little the outer begins to follow the inner. Now imagine money. You have a small idea or a dream that doesn't make sense. Intuition whispers, "There's something here." You begin to assume abundance. You talk differently. You manage money as someone responsible and prosperous. You take small steps toward the idea. And as you persist in that assumption, a new sense of identity forms a conviction. You stop being surprised by opportunities. You expect things to work because you know who you've become, and the world responds. In relationships, the same pattern appears. You intuitively feel you deserve better, deeper, healthier love. But intuition alone isn't enough. You begin to assume you are worthy, lovable, respected. You start showing up with new energy, new boundaries, new standards. Over time, this assumption becomes conviction. You don't chase, you don't settle, you don't negotiate with your worth. This conviction begins to repel unhealthy dynamics and attract people who match your inner standard. And in personal success, whether art, career, or any form of achievement, the pattern is identical. You feel a calling. Intuition points you toward it. You begin to assume the identity of the person who is already living that calling. You practice the behaviors. You speak from that place. You think from that place. Conviction forms. And eventually, the outer world recognizes what you have already accepted within yourself. Conviction beyond logic is not random. It is built. It is practiced. It is strengthened through persistence in the inner state. And now let's look at real-life stories of people who tapped into this exact pattern, people whose inner conviction came long before any proof existed in their outer world. Roger Bannister stands as a real-world embodiment of conviction beyond logic, proof that the impossible is only a belief away. For years, experts, coaches, and even medical professionals insisted that running a mile in under 4 minutes was physiologically impossible. They believed the human body simply couldn't handle such speed without collapsing. That was the logic. That was the assumption. And because the world assumed it, the world obeyed it. But Roger Bannister didn't. He held an inner conviction that went beyond logic, a felt knowing that he could do what the data of the time declared impossible. He trained with that conviction, visualized with it, and aligned his inner state with the result he believed was already his. On May 6, 1954, he broke the 4-minute barrier, and what happened after is even more revealing. Within the next few years, dozens of athletes broke the so-called impossible barrier. The limit was never physical, it was psychological, a collective assumption waiting for someone with conviction to override it. J.K. Rowling believed in the world of Harry Potter long before any publisher cared to read her manuscript. 12 rejections couldn't touch her inner conviction. She didn't hope. She didn't wish, she knew, and that knowing eventually reshaped the literary world. Sylvester Stallone. Stallone wrote Rocky in 3 days. Every studio rejected him unless he agreed not to star in it. They said he wasn't handsome enough, not known enough, not fit for a lead role. But Stallone had a conviction. I knew Rocky only worked if I played him. I already saw the movie in my mind. Even when he had only $106 to his name, he refused hundreds of thousands of dollars because the offers required removing him from the role. His conviction overrode logic, fear, and desperation. The studio eventually gave in. Rocky won Best Picture and launched Stallone into global stardom. Consider Walt Disney. Walt Disney pitched Disneyland again and again, only to be told it was impossible, childish, unrealistic. But he kept pointing to his imagination and saying, "It's already built in here." That conviction eventually built an empire. And Lady Gaga, long before fame, would practice accepting awards in the mirror and say, "I'm already a superstar." Not hoping to be, but already being, in her inner state. That conviction eventually materialized into the global icon we know today. This principle also came to life through Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs once said, "Reality will bend." Those who worked closely with him described what they experienced as a reality distortion field, a force driven by his absolute conviction in ideas that initially seemed impossible, ideas like the personal computer, the iPhone, touch-screen devices, intuitive software. Jobs believed you didn't begin with logic, you began with belief. As he put it, you have to have confidence in something bigger than logic. Jobs had such conviction that he pulled people into his belief and built a revolution around it. These people were not different from you. What separated them was not talent, luck, or opportunity. It was an inner conviction that became stronger than outer circumstances. But perhaps the most breathtaking examples of conviction beyond logic come from healing, where the body obeys belief. Nothing reveals the force of conviction more clearly than the moments when it restores health against all odds. Healing reveals the principle in its purest form. There is a famous medical case documented by Dr. Bruno Klopfer. A man named Mr. Wright had advanced cancer with tumors the size of oranges. He was given a new drug called Krebiozin, which doctors later discovered didn't really work. But here's the remarkable part. Mr. Wright believed with total conviction that this drug was a miracle cure. Within days of receiving the injection, his tumors shrank dramatically, his lungs cleared, and he was back on his feet. His doctors were stunned. Later, when he read news reports claiming Krebiozin was ineffective, his cancer returned rapidly. Doctors then gave him what they called a super version of the drug, but it was actually just salt water. They told him it was an upgraded formula. Once again, his convictions took over, and again he made a dramatic recovery. Eventually, after hearing the drug was definitively useless, he deteriorated and passed away. This case is foundational in demonstrating how the mind's conviction can directly affect biological processes, even when the cause is nothing more than belief. Take the story of Dr. Joe Dispenza, a powerful example of conviction beyond logic. After being struck by an SUV during a triathlon, he was diagnosed with multiple spinal fractures. 4 specialists insisted that surgery was the only option and that he might never walk properly again. Logic said his life would never be the same, but Dispenza made a radical decision. He refused surgery and chose to heal himself through intense inner imagery and unwavering conviction. Every day, for weeks, he rehearsed his spine rebuilding in perfect order. He didn't hope to heal, he knew he was healing. He held strong conviction even when his body showed no evidence. 9.5 weeks later, he walked out of the hospital without a body cast. Within months, he returned to training. This wasn't just positive thinking. It was conviction. conviction beyond logic, and his body reorganized to match the blueprint of his inner state. A striking example comes from Neville Goddard. A mother came to Neville devastated because her son was mentally unstable and his life was falling apart. She kept praying, "Please help him." But nothing changed. Neville told her that as long as she was begging, she was assuming lack and fear. He instructed her to seize the inner conviction that her son was already whole, stable, successful, and completely transformed. She went home and did exactly that. For weeks, she persisted in the inner knowing, in absolute conviction. She imagined him standing tall, laughing, living freely. She felt it as fact. Within a short time, her son had a total turnaround, stable mind, improved behavior, new opportunities, and a renewed life. The outer world reorganized itself according to her inner conviction so as to match her assumption. Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founder of the Unity movement, is one of the most remarkable healing stories in metaphysical history. By her mid-40s, Myrtle's health was failing. She struggled with chronic respiratory problems, debilitating fatigue, and her eyesight was rapidly deteriorating. Doctors told her she was incurably ill, and she was expected to decline for the rest of her life. But Myrtle didn't accept that as her truth. She began studying the power of the mind, prayer, and the connection between thought and the body. Instead of pleading for healing, she practiced a quiet, consistent conviction that every cell in her body was alive with divine life. She spoke to her organs as if they were conscious, intelligent, receptive. She would sit in silence and say gently, "You are filled with life, you are renewed, you are strong, I am a child of God, and I do not inherit sickness." This wasn't wishful thinking. This was conviction, repeated daily, calmly and consistently, until she felt the shift inside her. Over months, her body began responding. Her lungs strengthened, her chronic illnesses faded, and her eyesight, which had been growing weaker for years, gradually restored itself. Not overnight, not magically, but naturally and steadily as her inner state changed. Doctors couldn't explain it. But Myrtle didn't need an explanation. Her health returned not because she fought illness, but because she assumed and embodied wholeness from within. She lived for more than 40 years beyond a diagnosis that said her life was already closing. She remained healthy and active, teaching thousands of people the same principle, that the body follows the conviction held within. And then there's Dr. Terry Wahls. Dr. Terry Wahls was a physician diagnosed with secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, an autoimmune disease that typically worsens over time. Within a few years, she went from biking to work to being confined to a wheelchair, experiencing severe fatigue, brain fog, and nerve damage. Medicine told her the truth plainly: there was no known cure. Progression was expected. But something inside her refused to accept that this was the end of her story. Rather than fighting her body, she began listening to it deeply. She immersed herself in research, not from desperation, but from a strong conviction that the body must have an innate capacity to repair itself if given the right conditions. She changed her diet radically. She addressed stress and emotional overload. She aligned her daily life with restoration rather than survival. And most importantly, she held an inner assumption that healing was possible, even when logic said otherwise. Within months, her energy began returning. Within a year, she was walking again. Eventually, she rode her bicycle again, something doctors said would never happen. What's remarkable isn't just the physical recovery, it's that her healing began before the evidence appeared, rooted in an unwavering inner conviction that her body was not broken, only misaligned. In every case, healing followed a shift in inner identity, a deep conviction that sometimes moved beyond logic, not just a change in outer behavior. So the real question now is, how do you actually live this? How do you move from intuition to assumption, to the kind of conviction that reshapes your world? It begins with something simple, yet often ignored. First, listen to your intuition. Intuition isn't loud. It doesn't shout, it doesn't force, it doesn't argue with logic. It speaks in a gentle pull, a subtle knowing, a feeling that persists even when you try to brush it aside. To hear it, you don't need special techniques. You just need a moment of stillness, a pause in your day where you let the noise settle. When you slow down, your intuition becomes unmistakable. It shows up as clarity, as resonance, as the sense of, this is right for me. And here's the key, intuition never comes from fear. It comes from expansion. It comes from possibility. Listen to that voice first. Second, make assumptions that align with that intuition. Once you sense what your inner guidance is telling you, the next step is choosing the assumption that supports it. For example, if your intuition says you are meant for healing, then your assumption becomes, my body knows how to restore itself. If your intuition points toward abundance, then assume it inwardly that life supports you and opportunities naturally unfold for you. If your intuition says love is part of your path, then assume yourself as deeply connected, healthy, and harmonious in your relationships. Remember, assumptions create the framework for your reality. They're like the blueprint the subconscious begins building from. The assumption doesn't need proof. It becomes the cause of the proof. So choose assumptions that feel aligned, elevated, and true to your inner direction. Third, cultivate inner conviction. Conviction isn't intensity, it isn't effort, it isn't repeating affirmations with force. Conviction grows quietly. It becomes stronger every time you return to the truth you've chosen instead of the fear you've inherited. You build conviction by revisiting the assumption daily, feeling the outcome as if it's unfolding now, noticing the slightest evidence and letting it strengthen your certainty, refusing to let temporary appearances dictate your inner state. Conviction is not rigid, it's steady. It doesn't wobble because it doesn't depend on the senses. It lives in the unseen first. Sometimes this conviction is gentle. Sometimes it becomes unshakable. And sometimes, in the moments that change your life, it becomes conviction beyond logic, that mysterious, powerful inner certainty that doesn't care what the odds are, what statistics say, or what anyone else believes. It's the whisper inside you saying, this is already mine. It's already done. And finally, that's when reality shifts. Because when your intuition guides you, when your assumptions align with your purpose, when your conviction becomes unwavering, something extraordinary happens. Life rearranges itself, opportunities appear, healing begins, doors open, the right people show up, paths clear, and what once seemed impossible becomes the natural outcome of who you have become within. You move from hoping to knowing, from effort to alignment, from waiting to embodying. This is how victories are created. This is how celebrations begin. This is how people transform their lives without forcing, fighting, or struggling. It all starts inside, with intuition, assumption, and conviction, and then the outer world rises to meet the truth you've chosen. You become the cause, and life becomes the effect. Your outer experience rises to match your inner identity. It mirrors the truth you've chosen to stand in. It reflects the conviction you've allowed to take root in you, because everything you become internally must eventually show itself externally. That is the law. That is the pattern. That is the miracle that has shaped every transformation in human history. So as you move forward in your purpose, in your healing, your relationships, your creativity, your future. Remember this: your intuition is the guide, your assumptions are the blueprint, your conviction is the force that shapes reality. And when that conviction becomes steady, honest and aligned, whether within logic or beyond it, reality begins to reorganize itself around you. Thank you for tuning in to Wisdom Matrix 1111. If this reflection on conviction beyond logic resonated with you, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel for more contemplative content like this, share this with someone you feel inspired to support, and feel free to leave your thoughts or reflections in the comments below. Until next time, live from the conviction that moves you forward and watch the world rearrange itself around who you choose to be. Peace.